Hello and welcome to another exciting, action-packed episode of Art of the Game, or as we sometimes call it, The Art of the Game, where we talk about game mastering and other fun tips and tricks and whatnots for tabletop gaming. I'm Christopher Helton, the moderator. I will be modifying your roles tonight. And with me are Stacy Delorfano.
Hi,
Yes, that is your cue.
I'm not eating a taco.
And Tim Callahan.
I am eating a taco. Not really.
Everyone else is eating a taco. Christine cannot join us this month, and will hopefully be back next month for the next action-packed episode. So, our theme this month is inspiration. And actually, we even have a question, but I'm going to save that for a little bit in.
I had a couple on my comments too.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I saw. Actually, was
cool.
the question that Zach had asked, because he asked a pretty good question.
Yes, great question.
Inspiration. What inspires you to pick up a game? Is it the art? Is it reading through? Is it god-awful RPG fiction?
No.
I have never, ever purchased a book because of a fiction.
Or read any fiction related to RPGs ever.
Just skip those pages.
I'm just doing it for the articles. Now, so yeah, imagine you're walking into a theoretical, friendly local gaming store, and there on the shelf is this shiny book. What is it about that book that appeals to you and makes you go ooh and pull it off the shelf? Tim.
If it's shiny, I'm probably not that attracted to it. I like old dusty stuff that looks weird from like the 70s, like a photocopied magazine from the 70s would be really appealing to me. Something that looks obscure and weird is much more attractive than some glossy, shiny thing. If it has art that looks like it was made using a computer, I'm not attracted to it at all.
Well,
that's a pretty good point.
Yeah, so what? Well, then what is it that you would see in a book that would make you want to pick it up and at least start thumbing through it?
I would love to see black and white line art. If it looks like it has a genre smashing, if it has more than one genre, and if it's got somebody with a bazooka and somebody else with some kind of goggles and somebody else who has a sword of some type, I'm like, well, this looks like the best game ever. And so I will check it out. I like things that are kind of train wrecks. If someone tells me a system is balanced, then I'm not going to be interested in it. If they look at it and they tell me, oh, this system's just a total mess, then I'm like, well, I'll check it out. Sounds fascinating. So I'm really interested in train wrecks and disasters. I'm really interested in things that look like nobody else would love them. I really like Rollmaster, for example. And so,
wow,
yeah,
you are a freak.
Yeah, I'm a freak. Like the new edition of D&D, it's all well and good, but everything about the aesthetic of that does not appeal to me at all.
Stacy.
I could see where you're coming from there. The whole computer thing, I think, is what put it into perspective for me, because I am very, very much attracted to the artwork first. And I mean, it's a very much, the cover has to grab me. Unless it's something that I've seen online or something like that, where I've read a bunch about it, then the cover doesn't really matter that much. But if I'm just browsing for something, the art is really important to me, and I don't really know why. And it's an intuition thing for me. It's I either like it or I don't like it. It seems like my kind of thing, or it doesn't seem like my kind of thing. And that's just kind of what gets me to initially pick up a book. Whether or not I actually decide to purchase it depends on, usually if I can, within a couple of paragraphs, get a good idea of what the game's actually about, I can actually determine whether or not it's something that I want.
See, now I'm going to give an even weirder answer than both of you. I'm going to say
try it.
Organization. I want to open up a book, and within the first few pages, I want someone to start explaining how this game works.
Oh,
what I'm supposed to do. And within about the first 20 or 30 pages or so, I would like to see character generation.
But that's a pipe dream, you realize.
Really, I just if a book has like 10 pages about what this game's about, I just skip those. I get bored by those. I jump
Yeah, me
right to
too.
No,
I jump right to tables. I jump right to things that look weird. I do like character generation a lot, though. I think
I
character
don't
generation is important.
necessarily mean this is what you do with the game. I just want I want you to start telling me how this thing works.
What is role playing? Like the
Yeah.
20 pages on
Oh,
what is role playing?
Yeah. Yes, it has to have a very well defined with sources and footnotes section
Yeah.
on what is role playing.
I want
Preferably,
a book to have just like a URL, just like a short URL that you can type into your browser, and it gives you a
Just a QR
generic
code.
what role playing is. Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go,
The
QR
QR
code.
code, you scan it with your phone, and
Right.
it goes, "You idiot! Why are you trying to have us explain what role playing is?"
In fact, I think I'm going to do that in mine.
From now on, that will be the standard.
Why are you looking for this? Yeah. But no, I mean, I like a book that is relatively well organized enough that I can find things. I know that's a weird thing. I mean, when we were playing Swords and Wizardry, we played like for a year and a half, and how many times? What was the table that I was constantly looking for that I could never find?
I don't remember.
Wasn't it like the armor class table?
Maybe.
I think
Was
even
it the giant frog table?
No, I had no problem finding the giant frog table.
What kind of table do you need for swords and wizardry?
Well, it was
Like
just the table.
D20, real high.
Well, it just had all the numbers in one place, and it was easy for me because I don't like math. I like to have a table that has all the numbers and go, just roll this, and I go okay, and I roll that. And when I can't find that table, it makes me a cross GM.
Yeah.
And then I inflict giant toads.
You know what I can never find?
Players.
In like almost any version of D&D or any retro clone, I can never find the turn undead table ever. I never know where that is. That should be on the cover. That's all I need. Line art and a turn undead table. That's it. I'm sold.
So now now that we've gone into the games themselves, what about a setting would turn you on, Tim?
Again, I think the genre mashup stuff. Like for example, that game Colonial Gothic. I've never played it, but I bought the book not because of the cover. The cover is just text on a boring background, but because the setting was Revolutionary era with some werewolves and vampires and monsters in it. And so the setting itself had this historical contrasted with this supernatural. In general, I like settings that are really high concept and easy to grok. I don't like a setting that will have a lot of description about the history of the setting.
Oh,
I don't want to buy a giant campaign book that's just like one map and then a whole bunch of descriptions of NPCs and this tavern and everything about the history of this tavern. I do not care about any of that stuff. I think for me, the perfect length of a setting book is like that Greyhawk folio that has a giant map and it just has little blurbs on each area, and that's all you need, and you can just run with it. So to me, a setting could be almost anything as long as it's relatively simple and has some striking iconography, and that's all I need. I don't want it fleshed out at all.
Stacy?
Yeah, I second that whole don't flesh it out too much thing, because then you like fall asleep within the first half a page, and it's all over after that.
Well, it's almost as bad as RPG fiction at that point.
Yeah.
It really is. It's similar.
The only problem is, though, at least people who are writing the stuff for RPGs are usually somewhat versed in history, unlike they're versed in fiction writing.
But it's always really dry, like, in 1276, King so-and-so of the Wetch orcs went and took over the elven kingdom of, and it's just kind of like, it's like reading a history book. That's exactly what it is, and it's...
With elves.
I do a lot of, I don't use really adventures or modules or even a lot of settings. I like my settings to be as plain as possible, but I like them to have some character to them. So, like, a game that I would set in a D&D world would be completely different than a game that I would set in the Lamentations world, and it's because I have a sense of what that world is and what goes on in that world, but I don't need to know every little detail about that world in order to actually build within that setting. So, it's like broad strokes and, giving you an idea of how things feel and how people react and, general idea of who likes who and who hates who, and that's about it.
So you want the high school Cliff Notes version?
Yeah. I like settings that are unique. I like settings that are different. I usually will get into something and I'll want everything of that one thing for a while, and then I'll gorge myself on it, and then I'll hate it for a while, and then I'll go to the next thing. So, like, for months it was steampunk everything, and then I got tired of that, and then it was modern, kind of World of Darkness modern for a while, and then everything, and then it was like urban fantasy. That's where I'm right now, actually, is urban fantasy. Normal romances are.
I kicked that one off on you, so I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm digging it.
Now, what? How do these things inspire your own campaign creation? I mean, you may pick up, like a setting book or something like that, but you kind of peel it apart and do your own thing. As a game master, how does that inspire you? Tim? Or Stacy? Started talking.
No, go ahead.
Well, can you guys actually hear me? Because my headset was acting goofy.
Yes, we can now.
Okay. Well, I'll jump in then. So how does setting material inspire my campaign setting or my games? For me, I almost always just plop it in when I need something. So usually what I do, if I'm doing like a D&D style fantasy or space fantasy game, is I will draw just a single map, and it will be a pretty simple map of the local area. It'll be like the town map or a map of this part of the continent, and it will be really, really sparse, and we'll just have major landmarks on it, and then a couple points that I know, okay, this is going to be the name of a city, and I might not even know what that city is about, or this is the name of a town. And then what I'll do is I'll just go through my material that I already have, and I'll see if any of those published games, because I just collect a ton of game books, even if I never intend to use them. As I said, the weird, obscure stuff mostly. And then I just look and see, hey, here's something I haven't ever used. What if I made this town this setting? And I just pull something else, and I don't even take the whole campaign book. I just take maybe one little piece of that, and I just plop it down in there. And that's usually enough, because I think even the published settings that are relatively sparse still have too much information for me to keep track of. I don't want to keep track of it. That's the problem. I don't want to have to memorize it. So I just take one little corner of it, and then I make up everything around it. So that's pretty much what I do. I like to steal maps, and I like to steal kind of central key concepts, and then everything else I just either make up on the fly or customize my own thing. And even when I describe my own towns for my own purposes, what I would consider fully fleshed out is one page of description, and it just has a list of like the major NPCs and a couple things going on in town, and that's all I ever flesh out, and everything else I kind of make up at the table.
Stacy?
What was the question again?
Write these things down.
How do
these things inspire your own game?
I like to look at the pretty pictures a lot. So I like art-heavy books kind of for that reason. I mean, I make Pinterest boards when I'm starting to think of a game. And and because I spend a whole lot of, I'm a very visual person, so I spend a whole lot of time looking at things visually, and I have like a different feel that I want for each game, and there's ways to find pictures that actually match that kind of aesthetic that I'm looking for, and then they help inspire me. But see, that's what I usually do, is very, very broad strokes. I will flip through the book, I'll look through the settings. Sometimes I'll, like, if something stands out to me, like a particular location or something like that, I will stop and actually read that whole thing. But most of the time it's just like osmosis. I pick up things here and there and how it goes, and then that helps to inspire what I want to do.
That's actually kind of a good lead into what I was going to ask about next, was what sort of non-gaming things inspire you? Don't all jump in at once.
Comic books, a lot. Jack Kirby comic books.
That's a shocking answer coming.
Yeah, I love. I know everybody's shocked by that. Anybody who knows me is shocked. Commandy, Eternals, New Gods. I love just flipping through those comics and just looking at panels and not using any of the storylines, but using the images to inspire the creation of a monster or the creation of a god. I mean, the new issue of Crawljammer is all space gods inspired by Jack Kirby. It's a blatant attempt at doing that. And that's usually what I do, is I just flip through comics or I flip through books. If I'm running a campaign, for example, my Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea campaign, they were going to this lost island. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do for the Lost Island, but I thought I wanted to use some 1970s Gary Gygax material. But what I did was I pulled out some Gygax modules, and then I just randomly grabbed, not totally randomly, but I kind of looked around on my bookshelves and my comic book shelves and my gaming shelves, and I pulled a handful of different books and just threw them on the ground. And I said, okay, so I have Nemesis the Warlock from 2000 AD, I have Commandy, I have these Gygax modules, I have these Lynn Carter novels, and I said, I'm going to throw all this on the island. Oh, I had a Gamma World module, too. I said, all these things are going to exist on the island somewhere, and then I just figured out where I was placing them and just took inspiration from the images in those things, or from the concepts, and then I sprinkled that into the island, and that became the setting. And it was all just inspired by just really the high concept of the visuals, and that's it.
Stacy? And you can't say art because you already used that.
I wasn't going to. Music. I like to think about what kind of score, if my game was to be a movie, what kind of music would actually be associated with it. And it kind of, I have specific playlists for when I'm working on specific games, and I will just put my headphones in, and it just brings all sorts of inspiration while I'm trying to work on things.
Is it an imagery sort of thing? The imagery of the songs inspiring the imagery of what you're trying to create?
Somewhat. It's sometimes it's the lyrics. Sometimes it's a type of music. Like if I was doing something really urban, I might want to put a lot of hip hop in there. If I was doing something that, like, I have a character who's Irish, and there's a game that I'm kind of doing the mob thing with her, and so there's I'll listen to lots of Flogging Molly while I'm working on that. And Precious Dark, when I'm working on that, I have a very specific playlist that actually invokes a very specific kind of imagery in my head that helps me get to the space I need to be to think about what I'm doing.
I think I'm going to go with something different from the other two of you, and say that I like to use. I mean, not that I don't use comics or because I use the hell out of comics, but I also like to use like TV shows and movies. TV shows particularly. If you're like binge watching something on Netflix, it can be a really because I've started watching the Peaky Blinders show on Netflix, and now I want to run a 1920s Irish crime game for some reason. So
that'd be awesome. I think you should do that.
And it's really kind of odd listening to crap, what's his name? Killian Murphy.
Cillian Murphy, yeah.
Yeah, listening to him actually be Irish is kind of weird.
Right.
Um, Although not as weird as listening to Sam Neill being Irish, but it's the visuals of it, and one of the things that's really cool that kind of draws me into the imagery of the show, and it is the fact that unlike a lot of period pieces that tend to use either some crappy Irish music or period music that really just is kind of limp, they use contemporary music, which
That's
is
cool.
actually really kind the theme song to the show is actually Nick Cave's Red Right Hand, which I had actually officially grown tired of about 15 years ago. But the show has kind of sparked an interest in that for me too. But the visuals of it, I mean, they do such a really good job of bringing the visuals of the show and the imagery of the music into kind of the one big thing, and it makes me want to run a game, which is
So do you ever, when you watch those shows, because I've seen the first couple episodes of that series, and it is a gorgeous looking show,
yeah.
but when I watch stuff like that, it makes me want to adapt it to a different genre, and that's where like my genre mashup stuff, it
Yeah.
always comes in. If I see that, I would never ever think, oh, I want to set a game in that time period. I always think, oh, here's some character interplay, or here's a problem that's in this context, and I would say, oh, let's put this in a D&D type setting, or let's put it on Mars with some Martian
Right.
politics and some Martian
Or
mobsters.
I mean, in even in a more straightforward way, it would probably make for a really good like cyberpunk game, because
Right.
I mean, all it is just add some sci-fi elements. Bam, you've got cyberpunk. So,
Sure.
Yeah,
but
I use movies a lot too and TV for, tons of ideas. I will do a movie playlist the same way that I do a music playlist, and I'll binge watch movies that are based on whatever it is that I want to do while I'm doing it.
now, if you had say you're on a panel somewhere at a convention for some weird reason, and you have somebody out in the audience who is just starting out as a game master, and they've been listening to listening to you talk about these things, and they just asked, what is the best method for kind of bringing this into a gaming situation? What would you tell them?
Bringing setting material in.
Yeah.
I would tell them to do kind of what Stacy was talking about. Just either make an actual or metaphorical playlist of some sort, and then just see what rises up as you kind of mash these different songs together or different films together. Or I would have them actually create an image guide, either on some, it doesn't matter what website they use, but just put a bunch of images together and then see what emerges. I really like the impressionistic development of games as opposed to saying, oh, I'm going to take plot thread A from this movie and plot thread B from this novel. I don't like that idea. I like the idea of looking at images or listening to music and saying, what impression do I get? What am I feeling? And then starting to piece together elements of the game. And since I really don't think, for the most part, games should ever be plotted out, I think they should just have moments that exist and kind of concepts that exist or places that exist. And I think the plot should be developed as the game unfolds with the players. I think just going with those impressions, then charting out what you do know about the world, and then leaving the rest up to the actual gameplay is the best way to do it.
What would you add to that, Stacy?
Not very much. That was very well said.
Well, that's because I stole all your ideas, Stacy. That's why.
I do the same thing. I think when I actually, getting the impression, a big part of what I'm doing is I think about things that I want to happen, and they're like an amazing scene where a car blows up, or just they're little moments in the game that I actually want to happen, and then I let the rest of the game kind of organically flow around that. What kind of things can we do to make things like that happen, if not that exact thing? And it usually goes pretty well. I mean, I'm very improvisational when it comes to GMing. I don't do a whole lot of, I don't set up a whole big plot. I don't set up deep themes or anything like that. I create places and NPCs and things that happen, and then everybody from there, it just goes based on how the group actually plays it. But yeah, so I always try to tell new GMs, to not over-prepare. I mean, that's the tendency that you have as a brand new GM, is to think, I have to have absolutely every moment of this game planned out and set up in advance, and I have to have these huge decision trees, looking at what the players might actually choose to do at any given time. And it's just like, it makes it feel like GMing is this overwhelming big thing that you have to put a whole lot of energy into just even before you actually start gaming. And I think that hurts a lot of beginning GMs, because they just get frustrated.
I personally am a very lazy game master, so I don't.
I hate the term lazy game master, by the way. Just so you know.
No. Well, it's not. I mean,
I think it's a technique, and it's not just laziness. It's like an actual technique to prepare a certain way.
It's actually, it kind of, and as someone who is a comic fan historian, this might make more sense to you, Tim, than to Stacy. But I remember reading a long time ago, back in the old days when we read print magazines for our comic news, an interview with Mike Barron talking about his writing of The Badger, which is one of the odder comics that was made in the 80s and 90s. But he had this, he called his method the Zen Pop method of plotting, where basically he had an idea for what he wanted to have happen, and then the next thing he would try to figure out was, how would the Badger screw that up? And I think that really applies well to RPGs, because no plot you come up with really survives interaction with the players intact.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I think one of the things that really kind of sent me packing away from 4th edition wasn't necessarily the 4th edition D&D rule set itself, which I could play, and I think I could still play and it would be fine. But it's because I started to think of encounters as encounters, and I started to think of how to make them complex and challenging as encounters. And I also started using a lot of Dwarven Forge pieces and a lot of miniatures. And so I started having all these set pieces, and it really did constrain my thinking. And it turned it into a sequence of predetermined setting and consequences that couldn't really be changed, because I had this Dwarven Forge stuff all set up. And so if the players wanted to do something else, I could allow them to, but it was like I was obviously hinting toward this one direction, and it was not fun. It was uncomfortable to obviously direct them along a path, and that's not my natural gameplay style at all. So I was so glad to just get rid of all that and go back to earlier editions and just have the simple map with a few points. And even when I make maps, I just have words on them. I don't even have like terrain identified, and just let it go and just say, okay, where do you guys want to go? What do you want to do? And then make up more detail as needed.
Yeah, I mean, I would much rather. I tend to come up with, like, a handful of situations for a session that we may or may not get to. Well, hopefully we'll get to some of them. Otherwise, it was a waste of time. But usually it'll be more than we would actually need in a session, I think. And then it's like, okay, if the players go towards this way, then we have this. They can encounter, or I don't even want to use the word encounter, because you just ruined the word encounter. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it ruins everything.
But, I mean, that sort of thing. Just have a couple of kind of situations that are kind of floating out there that, if they want to go up against the tax guy, okay, I've got like an NPC for that, and this is the way he would react to certain things, and this is kind of what his office looks like, and then go. And then my players usually ask me something stupid that has nothing to do with it, because the one guy's trying to map when without letting anyone else know he's mapping. We're trying to break a player in our group of the habit
From mapping.
Yeah.
Mapping, God.
Well, it is. I don't know how much detail we're going to get into this particular facet of the topic tonight, but there's a very different kind of prep involved with the different kind of game. So if I'm prepping campaign information and setting stuff for like an exploratory game, like a D&D style game, I'll almost always do it the same way, which is to take those impressionistic ideas, to create a very rough map, to have a few kind of mapped out locations, like a dungeon here, a temple there, just have them handy in case they go in those directions, even if they're not totally fleshed out. And then also have my rough plot chart. But when I say plot, it's not the plot of the actual story, it's the evil plots of the bad guys in the area. And so this cult is doing this, and this is what they're doing on Monday, and this is what they're doing on Tuesday, and so on. And I'll do that for like 3 or 4 of the bad guy NPCs in the general area, and I will have them continue with their nefarious plans regardless of what the PCs do, unless the PCs intervene, in which case it will throw them off track, and then you will have some kind of change in their plans. And so I have like the kind of world unfolding, but it's very, very roughly sketched out. And that's how I run an exploratory kind of game. If I'm running a game that's like a superhero kind of game, where it's more based on actual events that occur in a kind of sequence, that I will do it more like kind of you and Stacy talked about. I'll have some events in mind, and I'll know things that are going to happen, and then I'll just kind of have the PCs do their thing and eventually get over to where the action is.
Yeah. I do a lot of when I'm trying to put together, when I'm trying to decide, I have a rule, and it's I only prep for 20 minutes. And if I have to go beyond that 20 minutes, then there's something wrong. So, I may try to make sure that, and it actually keeps me to not over prepping. And I spend that time thinking about what everybody else in the world is doing. Everybody who isn't the characters that we're playing, that are actually being played, what else is happening to all of these other people? And it changes from session to session because it depends on what they do in the world, before. I had one plot that, it just kind of, it starts with an idea. And this idea was, it was a changeling game, so the idea was that the Spring Court was being outed in public by some unknown writer who was writing little novels or little fictions for, it was a steampunk game, so little fictions for the newspapers. It was a newspaper man. But he was a human, and nobody could understand how this human was getting all of this information. And so then everything came from there. Basically, somebody came over and told them all what exactly was going on, and actually kind of hired them in order to solve the problem, one of the Spring Court people. And then it just kind of kicked off from there. And what happened from session to session was entirely dependent on what happened on the session before that. It's that he's going to go on every day, he's going to put out this, new fiction's going to come out, something that he's dreamed, because he's dreamed all of these things, is going to come up, and he's going to keep doing that until they do something to interrupt it. And if they do something to interrupt it, then there's other forces in play there that can actually undo or change what it is that they've done. The way that he was getting the dreams was through a pillow, and they actually stole the pillow. So the people who wanted to out the Spring Court just gave the guy another pillow. And so, just when they thought they had solved the problem, the next day fiction comes back into the newspaper, and they have to start all over again. So it's a really fun exercise too, just to sit there as you're prepping and think about what's everybody else been doing in this period of time, and what has the rest of the world been moving on and been happening, and how does that affect these characters? And usually it's up to them as to how it actually affects them.
Working off of what you were just saying, I'm gonna another way you get kind of inspirations is to mishear things.
Mhm.
And as you were talking, in the back of my head, I heard this voice suddenly start going, "The Supreme Court fights crime." And that is how you get that's how you get inspirations for new campaigns.
There you go.
Because suddenly you have an idea for a superhero campaign where you're playing the Supreme Court as the Justice League.
That's weird.
What I do. You guys actually get, the pretty. You guys have gotten the dull end of the stick when it comes to my coming up with odd things. Um, mostly because I know it would freak out David if I started getting into some of the weirder things I really like going into in games. So,
Oh, whatever.
but yeah, I mean, and so any sort of little thing can inspire a sudden. It's like any form of creativity, whether you're writing or you're making songs, which is also writing. I didn't want to say writing, but it's just the little weird personal click things that make the inspiration. So, I think we've actually covered a lot of and we inadvertently went over Zach's question without having to actually ask it.
Yeah,
So,
I forget exactly what it was. It was how art inspired you?
Yeah, it was basically how does art inspire you? So all of the art discussion in this vidcast is going out to Zach Smith, so who will actually probably never watch this, but
I think you'd really like it if he did.
Yeah. So, any end of the round, like lightning round things you want to toss out there that maybe we didn't get covered?
I'll say something. I think the best advice for getting inspiration is to be bored. It's to do something, just do nothing, sit and daydream and think and let your mind wander at some point in time. Because in the day and age that we live in, where we have absolute constant interaction with the things around us, and we're constantly paying attention to something, and our brains are always in use. And these kind of ideas don't come up when we're too busy focused on our iPhone or, playing Flappy Bird or whatever the hell the game of the week is. And so they come up when you got idle cycles going on. So be bored.
Tim?
When I need inspiration, I just grab a book off the shelf and I flip to a random page, and that almost always works. It gives me something, some kernel of an idea that I can run with. I have actually never had that fail. It's always given me something, even if it's not the first.
Oop, Tim froze up on us.
Oh no!
Oh, did I freeze up?
Yeah.
Oh, you're back. Oh, great.
Oh, good. Yeah, we don't worry. We jumped into the gap, so there was no silence. Go ahead and finish that sentence. We got you. We said you picked up a book and.
Yeah, flip to a random page, and it almost always works for me. Getting an idea, a kernel of an idea, and then running with it. It basically never fails to inspire me in some way.
I think my bullet point, and this will probably amuse you, Tim, would be basically to think what if Grant Morrison were my DM right now, what exactly would he do? And that's how I end up with a tree in a room in a dungeon.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Well, and I think on that note, we will wrap up this month's Art of the Game. Thank both of you for coming and our ongoing conversation. And I think next month we will go into the some of the inspiration stuff a little more, because I think we did kind of just scrape the surface. So.
There's a ton of it. Yeah.
All right.
I'm glad, by the way, that I'm not the only person on the face of the planet that gets impressions about things. And I mean, I'm so glad you said that, because for the longest time I thought I was just crazy.
Well,
that makes two of us. Who are crazy.
It doesn't make you less crazy. It just means.
Oh, it just means there's other crazy people. Okay, I can deal with that.
And this is the point at which we all say goodnight.
Good night, Internet.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for watching.
And we'll be back next month.